in terms of helping the child begin to process that trauma.
Yeah, and it not too difficult either about that.
It's not difficult if the adult has enough emotional space themselves. And what often happens is, and this is where you begin to see kind of generational emotional limitation, is the adult doesn't want to process their feelings, and so they're not able to give the child space to have thoughts and feelings about it. So then you begin to see kind of generational patterns of denial, avoidance, pretend, delusion, that kind of thing. So
yeah. So it kind of gets mixed into the whole family and passed down, and can be made much worse, I guess.
Absolutely.
By avoiding.
Absolutely.
So as far as parents pushing themselves to really try to take the time to talk to their kids about what's going on and what they've seen and their concerns is what I'm hearing, as well as.
Right. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when you think about a kid, I mean, again, they're developing their own sense of self in a world that's new to them. So, their primary psychological needs is, survival, safety, predictability, structure. They just need to know that the world's going to be the same place when they go to bed tonight and wake up tomorrow, right? So if there's any change in that, that's where parents need to be kind of the holders, the insulators, the ones that, reassure them that, that was a hard night and we've got some hard things we have to deal with in this family and we're going to deal with them and this is how we're going to do it. And I know it's hard, and just someone to really kind of hold them emotionally through the trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really helpful.
Okay.
Yeah. So thinking about the parents, at what point do you think, like, say you're a parent dealing with this on day in and day out, what kind of signs what kind of feelings would you start to have, like, that would indicate, man, I need to really try to talk to somebody else, to seek out therapy, seek out some help on this, because, I'm just on overload?
It's a good question. I'm not sure there's a particular answer to that. I mean, you're talking to a therapist, so, I'm a little bit biased in the sense that,
Right, no, I know.
Everybody needs therapy.
Well, I concur, but,
I think when you feel, well, first of all, if it feels like the child could benefit from extra support that's not you, that would be a good time to look for somebody. Because again, you might be tapped out because you're dealing with, X, Y, Z, in terms of other things,
right?
Other kids' problems, work, finances, household, whatever. So for the child to have an additional person that they can talk to, again, I don't see, other than just the financial commitment, how that could be harmful to anybody as long as the therapist is worth his or her weight in gold. And I think, the other thing that we look for is any kind of extraneous behaviors, right? So if the kid is falling behind in school, or if the kid begins to develop a consistent down mood, or if the kid starts turning to, obsessive behaviors, whether it's food or video games or something that begins to show some concern, kind of outside the normal range, then we just have to we don't want to jump to conclusions. We just want to start asking questions. We want to start being curious. And maybe it's something that, we can attend to within the family, and there's no shame if we want to start getting resources outside the family. And that could even be as simple as, letting the school counselor know that, you've got a couple siblings at home with this particular, issue going on, and just to please kind of keep a watchful eye over Johnny or Jimmy or whoever, because home is kind of challenging right now. So, I'm very much of the, it takes a village when we're raising our kids.
Oh, absolutely.
So there's no shame in asking for help. So.
Yeah, and that kind of sparked a thought in my head as far as the demands of having special needs kids with, multiple issues on different, mental health, physical, on relationships. Of course, I know you're going to recommend therapy, but as far as keeping keeping the lines of communication, open with whoever your partner is, and kind of knowing when the relationship needs some support to manage these ongoing crises.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the particular statistics.
Of course.
I just know that, there's all kind of ways couples don't work out outside of divorce, but divorce is pretty high for, parents that have to deal with a crisis with a child.
Yes.
And I know that's a higher number than just kind of regular divorce, if you will. So yeah, it's no secret that, if we're being pulled into some kind of parenting crisis, that the relationship then gets extra stressed. And so we either go into autopilot or we revert back to, relational behaviors that are destructive to our relationship, begin to not tend to our relationship and just take it for granted. And then, we turn around years later and there's nothing there. It's an ongoing, I always tell my couples, there's you, me, and we, right? And the we is its own entity. And if we don't tend to it like a living organism, it does begin to die, if you will. It begins to wither. And so we really have to be actively paying attention to that, which again, it requires extra effort if we're dealing with other things in our family life that is also requiring extra effort. So it's a big call to be able to keep that going.
Yeah.
And a hard thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah. Which leads me to, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I said particularly because, when you think about having a child with special needs or, in this case, TSC, you're talking about chronic stress.
Right.
And chronic stress means no end in sight. Right.
Right.
So it's a part of our daily life. So it becomes its own kind of, source of, has a life of its own in addition to everything else we're trying to maintain. And, we have to take that into consideration and figure out how we're going to keep the wheels in motion and keep our marriage tight and strong and solid. It's hard. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think your suggestion as far as in reference to children applies to any couples is there's no harm in getting some outside help and having a place to voice your concerns with a more objective party.
Yeah, and, people, again, I think they always say those. I think the statistic on that one, Jill, is that people call the marital therapist, the couples counselor, 18 to 24 months too late.
Really?
And part of the prognosis of how well a couple will fare is how much damage is already in the relationship. So if the damage is accumulating and you need to get help and you're not getting help, when you do finally get help, it may be too late. And so it's important to stay on top of that.
Yeah, I think that's a key issue. I think with couples with special needs, you're already stressed on so many levels. It's easy to just make those turns away instead of turning in towards facing these heavy subjects daily and rooting out the crap that accumulates in our heads. But
right, and the reality is we're human and we're limited and we only have so much time and energy, right? So in some ways I think of it as like sequencing. So it's like, okay, today, Johnny's going to get all of my attention and I really need the marriage to go into autopilot. But tomorrow or next week I really need to pay attention to my marriage because it's not going to survive on autopilot forever. So it's really about sequencing as opposed to trying to do it all right now.
I like that. That's a really good suggestion, that it doesn't have to all be done every day. Because I think sometimes I feel like, oh my gosh, if I don't nail this down today, it's going to bleed into the next day and it's just going to become worse and worse, when in reality, that's almost impossible to maintain. So
exactly. And I think this is also where, to bring in a little D.W. Winnicott, he's a psychoanalyst from Britain, he coined the term, Jill, the good enough parent. And, I think those of us with children with special needs, it's like, that's my standard. Today I'm going to be the good enough parent, right?
Yeah, I've heard I'm doing my shitty best every day.
I think that's a good modern way to recoin D.W. Winnicott. So.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really good and helpful. As far as treatment options, now I know I put a question on here. What types are available? In general, what would you recommend?
And you're talking about treatment for whom?
Well, I guess for couples, and what are some ways? I'm trying to get some ideas that aren't too, I don't want to say labor intensive, but that parents can access. Would you make the recommendation that couples counseling is best, or group therapy, or not that you need to make a recommendation, but
yeah, I mean, I think you could probably again put that on some kind of continuum. I don't think that you're going to be able to be a parent of a child with special needs long term, again thinking about chronic stress, if you don't have a self-care plan in place. Now again, that doesn't require other than what you pay your yoga teacher, right? And you pay at the grocery for, your healthy food or whatever, your running shoes or whatever.
Right.
That's kind of a self-perpetuated, some kind of self-care routine.
So having that.
To really have. Yeah, absolutely. So that would involve exercise and sleep and, anything that just kind of keeps you sustained and also keeps you grounded, right? So whatever your own kind of staying kind of connected to your core, routine is, I think you have to have that. And again, if you skip a day or two, great, but on that third day, you better get back to it, right? Because it does accumulate.
Right.
So certainly that. I think there's all kinds of support groups out there. I really, as you know from my introduction on this call, I'm a big groupie. I think there's real power in recognizing that you're not alone. So,
yes.
That can be anywhere from like a paid group therapy, which is run by a professional like myself, all the way to, a 12-step kind of meeting, to something in a church basement, to something that you could even start on, Meetup, some kind of grassroots thing. It's kind of I'm not alone, and you can identify with what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And I think, do you do a lot of online therapy? Is that something that's becoming more prevalent? Or online groups?
Yeah, I think it is. In fact, I know that there's like online 12-step groups. I think some people, due to either shyness or just convenience, are starting to kind of take advantage of some of those kind of groups. Certainly in my profession, they're starting to play more with kind of doing video conferencing therapy, which again makes therapy more accessible for someone that doesn't have the extra 2 hours to hook on a 50-minute session in terms of parking and transportation and yada yada.
Yeah, that's I think a lot of parents are, sometimes they can't leave their kids.
Right.
They literally can't. So the more that this kind of option becomes mainstream, the better is my feeling.
Well, and I think the other good news is because of the internet, there's really no excuse not to get support. It is so easy to find, right?
It really is. It's pretty amazing.
Right.
As far as medications, I wanted to touch on that. I'm not looking for any specific recommendations, but what's your feeling as far as medications for parents that are managing chronic stress as well as, children? What has been your experience? Just give me some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I am not a medical doctor, and I am very pro-medicine if it's called for.
Okay.
So I like to use the analogy as if I'm bleeding, right? I need the bleeding to stop so that I can, take advantage of these support groups or therapy or do a self-care routine. So, for example, if I'm so depressed that I can't function, right? Then I can't engage in a yoga class or take my child to the doctor or make sure there are fresh groceries in the house, right? So if medication is called for, by all means, use it. It's there.
Right.
I think there's no shame in that whatsoever.
Yeah, I think one of my concerns personally is meds being prescribed with very little oversight from for instance, a therapist?